Before we jump into this crazy story, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Maybe it's a sleepy beach town in California, a bustling high-rise in Chicago, or a cozy mountain cabin in Vermont. I love seeing how far these wild Karen tales of chaos and karma can spread around the globe. The first light of dawn spilled gently over the suburban backyard, painting everything in a soft, golden hue. The crisp morning air was filled with the faint hum of awakening life, birds chirping, leaves rustling in a tender breeze, and the distant murmur of a lawn sprinkler watering a neighbor's grass. In the middle of this quiet suburban idyll stood Jake, a man in his mid-20s, fully absorbed in his ritual. He was dressed casually, but neatly, a striped apron tied firmly around his waist over a faded denim shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. His fingers gripped the barbecue spatula and tongs with practiced ease, expertly turning thick beef patties, sizzling over the charcoal grill. The aroma of grilled meat mingled richly with a fresh scent of dew-kissed grass and blooming flowers. It was a kind of smell that invited smiles and hungry anticipation, a simple pleasure Jake savored every weekend. His eyes were fixed on the grill, watching as the meat caramelized and hissed, releasing bursts of steam that danced lazily in the warm morning light. For Jake, this was more than cooking. It was a small slice of peace, a grounding ritual in the chaos of life. Behind him, the suburban scene stretched out peacefully. A neat brick house with white-framed windows catching the sunrise, a manicured lawn trimmed to perfection, and a tidy patio set arranged for the coming day's leisure. Colorful flower beds hogged the edges of the yard, brightening the scene with splashes of pinks, yellows, and purples. Everything was calm, almost idyllic. But beneath this serene surface, tension simmered like the fire beneath Jake's grill. Unbeknownst to him, two figures stood just a few feet behind, their presence starkly at odds with the tranquil morning. Daisy and Nancy, the so-called Karen sisters of the neighborhood, were two obese women around 40 years old, their heavy frames silhouetted against the soft light. Both wore identical brown blouses and loose white pants, their dark brown silky hair pulled back into tight buns that revealed faces contorted with fury. Daisy's hand was raised high, gripping a large kitchen knife, its blade catching the sunlight in a cruel gleam. Nancy stood close beside her, holding a hockey stick angled forward like a weapon, her eyes locked on Jake with a fierce intensity. Their breaths came fast and sharp, the quiet crackle of the grill mingling with the sound of their mounting rage. The sisters moved with slow, deliberate steps, inching closer to Jake, who remained oblivious to the danger lurking just behind him. Jake's mind was on the food, on the weekend's plans, and the simple joy of cooking. The thought of conflict seemed absurd. After all, this was his own backyard, his sanctuary. The meat sizzling in front of him was his choice, his freedom. Yet a sense of unease began to prick at the edges of his consciousness, a flicker of warning he chose to dismiss. He felt the warmth of the sun on his neck, the peaceful chirping of the birds, the soft clink of his utensils. But behind him, the storm was gathering. Without warning, Daisy's arm shot forward, the knife flashing through the air. Nancy followed immediately, swinging the hockey stick in a brutal arc. The attack was sudden, violent, and fueled by a toxic mix of fanaticism and entitlement. Jake barely had time to react. His body twisted instinctively, the spatula and tongs dropping from his hands as he dodged the knife's edge. The sharp hiss of the blade cutting through air was almost drowned by the crash of the hockey stick smashing against the grill side. Chaos erupted in that split second. The peaceful backyard transformed into a battlefield. Jake's heart pounded wildly, adrenaline flooding his veins as he stumbled backwards, eyes wide in shock. His breath came in ragged gasps, mingling with the sharp scent of burnt charcoal and the acrid tang of panic. The sisters advanced, voices rising in venomous shouts, accusations hurled with the weight of years of built-up anger. "You disgusting murderer!" Daisy screamed, her voice raw and trembling. "How dare you cook that filth here? Right in front of us." Nancy added, her tone icy and merciless. "We warned you, and you just kept going. Now face the consequences." Jake's mind reeled. He couldn't believe what was happening. Neighbors who once smiled and waved now peeked anxiously from behind curtains and partially open doors, their eyes wide with shock and fear. The peaceful suburban morning was shattered by the sounds of a violent confrontation that seemed utterly surreal. Grabbing a chair from the nearby patio, Jake instinctively raised it as a shield. It was awkward, desperate, but all he had. His voice trembled as he tried to reason through the madness. "Look, please. This is my property. I'm not hurting anyone, just cooking some meat. There's no need for this." But Daisy's eyes blazed with fanatic fury, and Nancy's grip tightened on the hockey stick. Their faces were masks of righteous indignation, unmoved by Jake's plea. It was as if his words fell on deaf ears, drowned beneath the roar of their own self-righteous rage. As Jake tried to maintain his balance and keep the attackers at bay, a sudden crack echoed across the yard. The grill's side panel was smashed under Nancy's hockey stick. Charcoal and ash scattered, smoke puffing upward in a dark cloud that blurred the morning sun. The sizzle of the cooking meat was abruptly silenced, replaced by harsh breathing and the pounding of fists and feet. In that moment, Jake's fear crystallized into clarity. This wasn't just about a backyard barbecue. It was about something deeper: intolerance, fanaticism, and a toxic ideology that demanded submission rather than dialogue. He had become a target simply for living his life on his own terms. With his heart racing, Jake took a desperate step backward, crashing through a bed of flowers and tripping over a garden hose. The cold spray of water from a sprinkler soaked his jeans and sent a shiver down his spine. He scrambled to his feet, pushing past the sisters as they lunged again, desperate to escape the madness. The neighbors' faces blurred past him as he sprinted toward the street. Some watched silently, others whispered anxiously, but no one stepped in. The world felt strangely distant, the warmth of the sun replaced by the cold sting of isolation. Jake's breath burned in his chest as he fumbled for his phone. His fingers trembled as he dialed 911, voice urgent but strained. "There's been an attack, 2 women neighbors. They tried to hurt me over grilling meat in my backyard. Please, send help quickly." Static crackled through the line. The dispatcher's voice was calm but serious, promising to send officers immediately. Jake glanced back at his house. Daisy and Nancy stood at the edge of their yard, shouting venomous accusations and threats, their faces twisted with hatred. "You're going to pay for this," Daisy spat. "You'll regret ever lighting that grill." Nancy nodded, eyes cold as ice. "No one disrespects our beliefs." Jake swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just about meat. It was a war he hadn't asked for, but now was forced to fight. Alone, armed with nothing but his determination and a burning sense of injustice. He looked at the ruined grill, the scattered coals, and the crushed flowers, symbols of a simple pleasure turned battleground. The morning's warmth had turned to chill, the peaceful neighborhood fractured by fanaticism and fear. But deep inside, a spark ignited, a refusal to be bullied or silenced. Jake knew this was only the beginning. The sisters wouldn't stop, and neither could he. Whatever came next, he was ready to stand his ground. The screen of his phone glowed with a call, still connected, as sirens began wailing faintly in the distance. The battle lines were drawn, but the story was far from over. The aftermath of the attack left Jake shaken but resolute. The police arrived swiftly, their presence casting a temporary shadow of authority over the fractured calm. Officers took statements, inspected the damaged grill, and cautiously approached Daisy and Nancy, who alternated between feigned innocence and thinly veiled contempt. Yet despite the clear evidence of aggression, the sisters' sense of entitlement remained unshaken, their eyes burning with an unwavering conviction that they were in the right. Jake returned to his home with a bruised spirit but an undimmed determination. He hoped the incident was an isolated lapse, a violent outburst that might be quelled with a calm conversation. The next day, armed with a tentative olive branch, he ventured over to Daisy and Nancy's house, apron folded neatly beneath his arm, clutching a small tray of freshly baked vegan cookies, a peace offering. His steps were cautious, but his voice steady as he called out their names. The door opened slowly, revealing Daisy, her eyes narrowing as she took in Jake standing on the porch. Nancy appeared behind her, arms crossed, her expression cold and unmoving. "I thought maybe we could talk," Jake began, forcing a smile that felt brittle on his lips. "I want to understand your perspective, and maybe we can find a way to coexist peacefully." Nancy's lips curled into a dismissive sneer. "Coexist? You mean so you can keep murdering innocent animals in your backyard?" Daisy took a step forward, knife now sheathed but still hanging at her side. "You don't get to understand anything. You're poisoning the neighborhood with your filth." Jake swallowed hard, the bitter taste of rejection settling in his throat. "I've been careful. I grill responsibly. I even tried offering vegan options at the last block party." Their laughter was cruel, cutting through the quiet morning like shards of glass. "That's not good enough," Daisy spat. "We don't want your murder on our streets." The conversation devolved quickly into accusations and insults, their voices rising as neighbors peered curiously from behind curtains and fences. Jake felt a sinking weight settle on his chest. Their fanaticism was deeper than he'd imagined. He left, the taste of failed diplomacy bitter in his mouth. What had started as a hope for peace had spiraled into a widening rift. Over the next few days, Daisy and Nancy's campaign escalated. First, Jake's driveway was blocked by their old, rusted van, parked deliberately to prevent his car from leaving. When Jake confronted them, Nancy sneered, "Maybe you should think twice before lighting that grill again." One morning, Jake stepped outside to find his prized grill vandalized, its once gleaming surface slashed with black paint, the words "Animal Killer" scrawled in jagged letters. The smell of burnt rubber and spray paint lingered in the air, assaulting his senses. His stomach churned with anger and helplessness. Social media became another battlefield. Daisy and Nancy launched a relentless smear campaign, posting inflammatory messages and doctored photos accusing Jake of cruelty and environmental destruction. Comments flooded in, some supportive, many hateful. Even friends hesitated to defend him openly, wary of association. Jake's phone buzzed constantly, a digital storm he struggled to weather. Each notification was a reminder that this war was no longer just physical. It was psychological and public. The neighborhood that once felt safe now bristled with hostility. One evening, Jake sat alone in his darkened living room, the glow of his phone illuminating his tired face. The messages were relentless, and the weight of isolation pressed heavily upon him. His eyes scanned the latest comments, threats, insults, false accusations. The sisters had managed to poison not just the air around his house, but the very community itself. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, a flicker of resolve ignited. This wasn't the time to back down. If anything, the stakes had grown higher, and the fight demanded a new approach. Jake reached out to his closest friend, Marcus, a calm and level-headed neighbor known for his savvy with social media and local politics. Over coffee, Jake laid bare his frustrations and fears. Marcus listened intently, nodding thoughtfully. "You're not going to win by yelling back," Marcus said quietly. "But you can outsmart them. They're loud and arrogant. If you expose their true nature, the whole neighborhood will see who they really are." Jake's brow furrowed. "But how?" "They've been careful, hiding behind their righteous image." Marcus smiled wryly. "They're careless when it comes to themselves. Arrogance makes people sloppy. You just have to catch them off guard." Together, they devised a plan. Jake began discreetly recording encounters with Daisy and Nancy, capturing their threats, rants, and moments of aggression. He set up cameras on his property, careful to stay within legal boundaries, determined to gather undeniable proof. Late at night, he reviewed hours of footage, his pulse quickening as the sisters' true colors bled through their polished facade. One clip showed Daisy storming into Jake's yard, knife brandished, yelling accusations that no one could ignore. Another caught Nancy smashing a neighbor's mailbox with her hockey stick in a fit of rage. The evidence was irrefutable, a damning portrait of vindictiveness and violence. At the same time, Jake documented the impact on himself, the stress, the social isolation, the invasion of his privacy. He began compiling a detailed journal, every incident carefully noted with dates, times, and descriptions. But the sisters were not passive players. They sensed a shift, their intimidation tactics growing more desperate. One afternoon, Daisy and Nancy blocked Jake's path as he walked home, their faces twisted in scorn. "You think you can outsmart us?" Daisy snarled. "You'll regret crossing us." Nancy jabbed a finger in Jake's chest. "We own this neighborhood." Jake met their gaze steadily. "You don't own anything. This ends when the truth comes out." The sisters hissed threats and stalked away, but their swagger faltered slightly. Jake knew the tide was turning. Still, the atmosphere remained thick with tension. At the grocery store, Jake felt the weight of stares. At the local cafe, whispers followed his every move. Even the mail carrier seemed hesitant, delivering his packages with a wary glance. The conflict had spilled beyond backyard fences and into everyday life. Jake's friends urged caution, warning him that escalating the situation might bring retaliation. But Jake was no longer the man who cowered behind his grill. He was a man fighting for his right to live in peace and for justice to be served. One evening, as Jake reviewed the growing mountain of evidence, his phone buzzed with an alert. A video clip had gone viral online, showing a woman wielding a kitchen knife threatening a neighbor, Jake. The comments exploded with outrage, hashtags demanding accountability trending rapidly. The digital exposure was a breakthrough, but Jake knew this was only the beginning. Daisy and Nancy would not go quietly. They would fight back in ways he could not yet predict. Yet beneath the storm, a quiet satisfaction stirred. The mask of the perfect neighbors was cracking, their hypocrisy laid bare for all to see. Jake leaned back in his chair, eyes tired but bright with determination. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the fight felt winnable. As night deepened outside, the shadows cast long over the neighborhood, but Jake's resolve burned like a beacon, steady, unyielding, ready for what was to come. Jake sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the glow from his laptop casting sharp shadows across his determined face. Days had turned into weeks since the sisters' violent outburst, but the fight was far from over. His efforts to expose Daisy and Nancy's true nature had begun to ripple through the neighborhood and beyond, stirring a storm of support and backlash that threatened to reshape the fragile peace of the suburban streets. The viral videos he had painstakingly collected, the moments of rage, the brandished knife, the destructive swings of a hockey stick, were being shared with mounting fury. Online forums buzzed with debates, neighbors whispered in hushed tones, and local news stations clamored to cover the escalating drama. The sisters' carefully curated image of moral superiority was unraveling thread by thread. The first knock on the door came unexpectedly. Jake opened it to find a police officer, face solemn but professional. "Mr. Reynolds, we've reviewed the evidence you submitted. There's enough to move forward with charges against Daisy and Nancy Thompson." A surge of relief flooded Jake, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was only a step, not the finish line. The sisters were formidable adversaries, fueled by anger and a fierce belief in their cause. Word of the impending legal battle spread quickly. The neighborhood became a battleground of opinions, with some rallying behind Jake's right to live peacefully, and others sympathizing with the sisters' fervent vegan activism. The tension was palpable, every glance a potential confrontation, every whispered conversation a ripple in the simmering conflict. Jake found himself preparing for court with the same precision he once reserved for his backyard barbecues. Each document, every piece of footage, was organized meticulously, a weapon forged from truth and patience. His lawyer, a sharp and empathetic woman named Claire, was his anchor in the storm. "You've done everything right," she assured him during one tense meeting. "The evidence is solid. The community support will help. But be prepared, this will get messy." The sisters did not take the charges lightly. In the days leading up to the hearing, Daisy and Nancy appeared defiant, their public appearances marked by speeches denouncing Jake as a villain who deserved punishment. Their social media followers doubled down, flooding comment sections with vitriol and threats. Yet beneath their bravado, cracks began to show. Nancy's eyes, once fierce, now darted nervously during neighborhood encounters. Daisy's public rants grew more erratic, her voice occasionally faltering. The weight of scrutiny bore down on them, the community's growing disapproval a quiet but persistent hammer against their facade. The day of the hearing arrived with an electric charge in the air. The courtroom was packed, neighbors lining the benches, eyes fixed on the drama unfolding. Jake sat calmly beside Claire, the evidence arrayed like a shield before them. The judge's stern gaze commanded order as the proceedings began. Jake gave his testimony with quiet strength, recounting the moments of violence and intimidation with vivid detail. The video evidence played, each clip a stark indictment of the sisters' actions. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the knife flashed and the hockey stick crashed, the sisters' aggression undeniable. When Daisy and Nancy took the stand, their attempts to justify their behavior fell flat. Daisy's voice trembled as she claimed self-defense, while Nancy's glare faltered under the judge's pointed questions. The truth was unyielding, and the sisters' facade crumbled under its weight. The verdict was swift. The sisters were found guilty of assault and harassment, sentenced to community service, and ordered to issue a public apology. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations, some relieved, others bitterly disappointed. Outside, Jake felt a rush of vindication tempered by the heavy cost of the battle. The neighborhood's eyes were on him now, some with respect, others with lingering resentment. But he stood tall, the taste of justice sweet and hard-earned. In the days that followed, Jake returned to his backyard, the grill once again clean and ready. Friends gathered, laughter, and the savory scent of cooking meat filling the air. The wounds of conflict had not vanished entirely, but a fragile peace had returned. As he flipped the sizzling patties, Jake allowed himself a wry smile. The sisters, now isolated and humbled, were a cautionary tale whispered among neighbors, a reminder that fanaticism often leads to ruin. Yet Jake knew the fight for respect and freedom was ongoing. Shadows of resentment lingered, and new challenges surely awaited. But for now, he reveled in the quiet victory, a man who stood his ground and emerged stronger. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the yard as Jake raised a cold drink in silent toast to resilience and the power of truth. The grill hissed softly, a comforting rhythm against the evening calm. The story was far from over, but the message was clear. Standing up for oneself, armed with courage and integrity, could turn even the fiercest attacks into stepping stones toward justice.